Hello everyone, let's have a quick chat about this week's Hornby 2024 range announcement. I'm not going to exhaustively list every item announced. If you haven't seen the list of what was announced, there are plenty of places you can get that information, not least of which from Hornby themselves, either via their video or their website. I want to talk about the themes I'm seeing in the releases, and what I see behind it. Where I do mention prices in this, unless I say otherwise, I'm giving Hornby's recommended retail price. A quick survey of a few retailers suggests you can place a pre-order at about 10% lower than this price for the vast majority of the items in the 2024 announcement. This was a relatively sparse announcement. I honestly don't think that's a problem. What is a problem is the backlog of things from previous years that haven't been delivered yet, and the lack of new announcements helps towards fixing that. Now, this wasn't uniquely a Hornby problem. Bachmann have been rightly criticised for this exact same issue too, and in response, they now delay announcing products until they're at max a few months from release, and they've also switched to a quarterly announcement schedule. Hornby appear to be doing something fairly similar, but not identical. They're announcing closer to release, and they've stated that there are further announcements to come during the year. However, aside from a TT120 announcement in April, I think, they have described these as surprises. We don't have a schedule in the way Bachmann have gone for. As a result, I suspect what we have here is a full year's worth of range, but with a few bits of headline new tooling announcements left out to spring on us later. With the combination of a lot of things scheduled to arrive this year that have already been announced in previous years, and some headline tooling omitted that may also arrive this year, this announcement honestly looks both sparse and full of filler. Once you factor in the previous announcements that will arrive this year, it actually looks like a fairly busy year for model delivery for Hornby. It's just that most of the interesting stuff was not announced this week. There was a heavy focus on Collectorbait in this announcement. Not all of that is bad. The 00 range, for example, with die-cast bodies on a modern spec chassis in period-branded boxes, seems to hit the right approach to collector-focused products. It provides a useful model with an appropriate layer of nostalgia. Thick enough that it does appeal to those with 00 member berries, but not too thick to prevent them being useful models on a current spec model railway. And we've got a new 00 Loco this year. It's not a Loco I'm personally interested in, but I understand the appeal and the range seems to be a reliable seller. The Triang stuff though, I really don't get that. It's obsolete spec tooling for today's layouts, but not actually old enough to be the proper period Triang tooling. It's admittedly less awful than the Beatles tat, but despite that being utterly worthless from a model railway perspective, there are dedicated Beatles collectors who will buy all kinds of Beatles merch, who are obviously the target audience for that range. The Triang stuff though, I don't get it. And I suspect that after a brief initial rush, a lot of that stuff will sit on the shelf for some time. The early railway, Era 1. The headline new locomotive in this announcement is obviously Locomotion number 1. It's presented in its as-preserved condition, and marked up as Era 11. They were careful to announce that technically no parts of Locomotion as modelled actually date from 1825 in this version, although the boiler does apparently date from 1827, so it is at least a period replacement. But it's clearly also aimed at an Era 1 scene, as well as a railway preservation audience. This is an interesting model, and I suspect a lot of people will be picking this up. At 170 quid it sounds high for something so small, but also looking at the intricacy of the mechanism, it honestly seems to be not unreasonably priced. And to have a working version displayed at announcement means it's likely to be actually delivered this year. There's also Tiger, obviously based on the Lion model but with a notably changed firebox. This is interesting as Lion was modelled as preserved, having been restored for an event in 1930. It certainly wasn't what we'd call a restoration today. It's more like a fan fiction recreation of what people then thought a Loco from 1837 should look like, using some discovered remnants and a guesstimated identity as a starting point. While the firebox on the Tiger model has been changed from the 1930 variant of Lion to something more likely to be appropriate, a lot of other details are still inherited from the 1930 version, and a few genuine Era 1 enthusiasts are big mad about how accurate this isn't. We'll see pretty soon whether people are genuinely interested in modelling Era 1 accurately, or actually just magpieing over curiosities from how well this sells. You can't really tell this from Lion, as Lion had 95 years, half of its lifespan, in its current form, including starring roles in film, to build a following with its current appearance. Tiger never had any of that, so that isn't tipping the scales for it this time. but I would be surprised if the inaccuracy to an actual 1830s, 1840s scene impacts sales that much, as I suspect genuine Era 1 modelling is not a significant market right now, and most people would be after it for the novelty value rather than as a serious attempt to model the Liverpool and Manchester Railway in 1842. There are also individual coaches and wagons that were previously only available in box sets. This is likely to be well received as people were complaining about how they were bundled previously. Purist Era 1 modelers will likely still complain about these being models of 1930s recreations, and not of actual Era 1 stock, but again I would be surprised if many of these end up operating in a true Era 1 scene. Leaving the early stuff behind, there's a decent number of new identities and liveries for existing tooling steam locos. This makes up the bulk of the Steam Era range announced today, and it's good to see a decent selection. All too often we see a raft of liveries on one tooling arriving all at once, and then it goes quiet and becomes unavailable. Making locos available in the range by releasing regular new liveries and identities on existing tooling is important from a hobby accessibility standpoint. For me personally, my modelling period starts in the twilight of the Steam Era, and really only includes a couple of final years of mostly 8F and Black 5 operations. Most Steam locos are not relevant to me from a modelling perspective. Aside from those two classes, and possibly a BR standard of some kind, the average movement of a Steam loco in my period was its last haul to the scrapyard. Now there's an idea for a train guaranteed to upset a few people, but not starting with a £250 Hornby loco though. Moving beyond Steam, for the recent era modeller, the GNER HST is interesting and worth calling out. GNER's parent company Sea Containers went bankrupt and hasn't existed for some time. It's unclear if anyone purchased the GNER name from them in the bankruptcy proceedings. Unless Sea Containers signed an open-ended license with Hornby 2 decades ago for any and all future products they possibly wanted to make, which is technically possible but highly unlikely, Hornby are YOLOing it and hoping no one crawls out of the woodwork with provable ownership of the GNER brand. They did the 91 and Mark IV set last year, and this year it's the HST. With a company with the profile of Hornby having put out 2 different products in consecutive years with this branding, the chances that there's someone silently sitting on ownership of the GNER name trying to figure out how to monetize that is looking increasingly less likely at this point. That's definitely good news for fans of early privatisation liveries, as there was a concern that this livery in particular would no longer be possible to see produced because of the uncertainty on where the trademark had gone. If it's genuinely abandoned, it is a free-for-all. But with Sea Containers firmly gone, the only surefire way to find that out is for someone big to do it and see if anyone pipes up and tries taking them to court. Given that this is the second run from Hornby, I think we can be confident that didn't happen the first time round. More recently, the DFT has insisted, as part of any franchise agreement, that they get the rights to the brands at the ends of the franchises, which properly solves that issue, but also precludes companies using their own names and corporate branding, or attempting to build a brand beyond the individual franchise. You won't be seeing any more Arriva or Virgin or Stagecoach or Connex or anything like that in the railway in this country because of that rule change. The D&E range is very heavy with railroad spec tooling, even though some of it isn't branded railroad, but it should be. I don't mind railroad as a concept. Railroad locos don't meet my personal standards, as single power bogie diesel won't haul a full train up my gradients. I do wish Hornby were a lot more consistent about what is and isn't considered part of the railroad range. Having 2 diesel locos, which are both ex-Lima tooling, single motor bogie drive, both about the same price, but only one of which is branded railroad and the other is considered in the main Hornby range, is frankly pretty confusing for customers. The Hornby 66 is clearly a railroad standard model. It's sourced, specified and priced like one. Please just be honest and consistently draw a line here. Outside of the railroad range, we've got the GNER HST I already mentioned, a First Great Western Class 153, 2 shunters, one of which is a depot pet livery, the other is as preserved, and 2 one-off Class 67 liveries. Precious little for the British Rail era modeller like myself. Within the railroad range, there's a better selection, including a couple of 47s and several 66s. Factory Sound Railroad Plus locos at 120 or 140 quid, the kind of money you could easily spend on just a sound decoder, is very interesting. A lot of people are going to be introduced to DCC sound via locos like these, and as far as I'm aware, for a diesel outline model, the Hornby TXS sound decoder is generally regarded to be of acceptable quality. It's less well received for steam locos, where things like valve gear synchronization are a critical missing feature. Let's have a look at some wagons. There are 3 more TTA packs using last year's new tooling. On the plus side, Hornby represent these with the correct later suspension. Bagman's model of the TTA features the original suspension on the underframe and is really only appropriate for a transition era scene. That's bad enough, but Bachmann have also reused that chassis under bodies that in real life used former TTA chassis. But in reality, they never saw the original suspension, only the rebuilt suspension. However, the asking price is 110 quid for a 3-wagon pack. There's many cheaper wagons well ahead of that in my personal queue, so these aren't even going near the list at the moment. Compare that to the 3 packs of 20-ton coke hoppers. These are a similar size and spec wagon. The tooling is a few years older, but still recent. These have a retail of 75 quid for a 3-pack, which I find to be a much more reasonable cost. Sadly, I'm not looking for these specific wagons though, but I would have the TTAs at 75 quid a pack. However, the price for unrealistic pricing here has to go to the Laureate Y, or 65 quid for a fairly short 2-axle flat wagon with a load. At the other end of the scale, the now Railroad branded HAA hopper looks interesting. Based on the picture, this looks like the 2003 Super Detail tooling rather than the 1980 tooling Railroad HAAs have used in the past. I think this makes it the first time a former Super Detail tool has got into the Railroad range. That would put this 1999 retail wagon clearly in the interesting pile. Having said that, previous main range releases of the same tooling are on the shelf for 18 quid each on Hornby's own website or £50 for a triple pack from some other major retailers. So it's not that groundbreaking, it's just a realistic RRP based on current observed pricing, which is likely as a result of direct competition from other manufacturers on this specific wagon. Perhaps, though, this will give Hornby the impetus to migrate other similar wagons from the Super Detail era of the early 2000s to the Railroad range. This might give us some more decent, usable wagons at market-friendly pricing. This uncertain pricing trend continues with reruns of the Trout and Sea Cow and Sea Lion ballast hoppers. A 2-axle Trout at £30 doesn't seem like a great deal, but the much larger bogey Sea Cow and Sea Lion hoppers at £37.50, not that much more expensive, are much more interesting. All in all, this was a notably but understandably sparse announcement, and all I've added to my queue is a Sea Cow and a couple of Sea Lions. But that's okay, because there's plenty of stuff from previous announcements due to be released this year that's already in my queue. I'm looking forward to them making progress through their backlog, and also to find out what they're going to surprise announce during the year. See you next time at Donget's Model Railway.